A very warm good afternoon to everyone who have joined us today. We are back again with our regional consultation series, which we have been doing. We have already done two, focusing on the south and the western part of the country. And we are just carrying forward the discussion that we have sought to initiate in line with activities that ICM is doing for celebrating 75 years of India's independence. And what better way to contribute than to generate more debate and discussions and coming forward with ideas on how to improve the livelihood opportunities for the people of our country. So we have done some excellent discussions in the past, and some very useful suggestions have come up as a result of our previous discussions, which have been creating a brand for the people of our country overseas, um, more active engagement with the private sector, and pursuing various other means such as certification and looking at accreditation and qualification requirements and so on. But I will not preempt the discussion today. So with those words, let me welcome our keynote speaker for the day, Secretary CPV and OIA, Shri Sanjay Bhattacharya. The moderator for our discussion, Dr. Meera Sethi, our distinguished panel, Ms. Soma Sharma, Mr. Rajiv Gupta, Mr. Mukhalas Mehdi, and Mr. Kishore Das. So welcome to all of you. For the participants, a very warm welcome, but I will just reiterate what we do in every panel discussion, that please do keep your mics on mute while the speakers or the keynote speaker is speaking, because it really disturbs somebody's concentration while giving their remarks. And we do have dedicated time towards the end for taking questions from the floor. Additionally, you can use the chat option as well. And please mention if you have a specific question addressed to a particular speaker. I'm sure the moderator will take those up towards the end. With those words, let me invite our chief guest, Secretary CPV and OIA, and Chairman ICM, Shri Sanjay Bhattacharya.
Thank you, Surabhi. At the outset, let me apologize for not being able to switch on my video. So, unfortunately, you can't see me, but I'm very much here. Still trying to see if I can get the video back, but somehow it's not working. But I must first thank ICM for organizing this series of webinars on what we see as the way ahead as we try and improve the situation so far as overseas employment is concerned. And I must add at this juncture that this is a very high priority for the government. And we have, in fact, started a series of interactions directly with the state governments as well to take this idea forward. And as Surabhi mentioned, the importance of this lies in the engagement of all the stakeholders. And when I say all the stakeholders, I would like to place particular emphasis on the private sector, because I do see an increasing role for the private sector in this space of international migration dynamics. So what we have today is a very changing scenario in which the international labor markets for both workers and professionals is in a very dynamic and fluid situation. And there are three broad trends that I would wish to highlight at the beginning. The first is the role of technology and how it is bringing about greater automation and digitalization, and in that way bringing about greater specialization and the requirement for skills amongst our workers and professionals who wish to travel overseas for employment. Second thing is that unlike India, which continues to be a young country, though just a few days ago, we read the news that we have reached that level of fertility rate, which will hereafter lead to possibly a plateau of our population and eventually a decline. We are still a young country, but unlike India, a large part of the rest of the world is actually aging. And therefore, the aging demography of many of the parts of the world bring about a new set of requirements in those countries where countries that have relatively youthful populations would be able to fill the gap. And this is a tremendous opportunity for India. And this is not just opportunities in the healthcare sector, taking care of old age people, but also in various manufacturing, services, agricultural sectors as well. It's a very, very big opportunity. The third broad trend that I think we need to recognize and factor in our migration policies is the fact that there are new migration destinations that are becoming important because of the two earlier reasons that I cited. As you know, traditionally, the bulk of our migrant workers go to the Gulf, though the bulk of our migrant professionals go to the more developed countries in the US, Europe, and other parts. But what we are seeing is now that there is increasing demand for Indian workers in parts of the world where we traditionally have not had people going. So these new destinations are in East Asia, in Japan, with whom we have a specialized skilled workers memorandum, with Korea that is very keen, with Taiwan that is very keen, Mauritius that is now looking at probably 17 different sectors in which people can go, as well as countries in Europe. And we have concluded agreements with Denmark, UK, and Portugal, and are in the process of doing negotiations and negotiations with several other countries in Europe. So it is a very, very exciting world that we are in terms of new destinations. The second set of issues that I wanted to mention, since this is a webinar that is focused on the eastern part of India, is that why Eastern India? And I think the main reason is that this is a part of the country that has relatively been underexposed. And more so, if you look at the northeast of India, what we call the northeastern states, they have had relatively low share of the migration outflows. But at the same time, what we do find is that many of these states, particularly if you look at Eastern India in terms of Bengal, Bihar, Eastern UP, Orissa, these are states that have traditionally or historically had large flows but have lower flows today. And many of these, including Northeast, have now been developing robust infrastructure or skills. So there is also a stated preference, for instance, in Japan, where they have expressed a preference for people from the Northeast and have sent dedicated Japanese language teachers to the Northeast to help people build it up. So I think Eastern India now needs to put its stakeholders together. Particularly, the government is very keen, as we went out to the Northeast and to Bengal, where we found that the governments are extremely keen and excited about the new prospects for both workers and professionals to go out in larger numbers. Um, and what we do need is to blend it in with the kind of skill programs that we run in these places. So that brings me to the last point, which is about skills, certification, language. And I want to get back to something that I have been mentioning to some of the other people, and Surabhi is familiar with this because she also deals with the Europeans. They are now talking of competency rather than just skill, because competency is a skill plus kind of an environment. And so when you are going to any country, whether it is to the Gulf or to one of the new destinations, what you do need to know is that in addition to the skill, the kind of work that you will need to do, is that you need to have a certain familiarity. It is definitely advantageous if you are to have that familiarity with the customs, the rules and regulations, and increasingly the language of that place. Uh, we are finding that many of the new migrants, particularly professionals and increasingly workers as well are those who tend to stay on in their new place of work for extended periods of time. Some of them even get domiciled over there eventually. But many of them, after all, the economic conditions in India are growing at the fastest rate ever. We are the fastest growing economy in the world, major economy in the world. And so there are many, many who actually come back. But I will say that we should now begin to switch focus on competencies rather than just skills. We in the Ministry of External Affairs, along with NSDC, which is an outstanding skill development body, have been working on some of the soft skill aspects. So you're familiar with the pre-departure orientation training. And what I would say is that every person who's going overseas, every person, whether he's a worker, he or she is a worker or a professional, should go through this pre-departure orientation training. And what we do in the pre-departure orientation training, which is also available online now, is that we provide with certain soft skills regarding the place that you're going to, the laws and regulations, and very importantly, what is the role, what is the kind of support base that you will get from the embassy when you are there, if you are in difficulty. And this is particularly important for the more vulnerable sections of the community. But as I said, this is only the soft skill. What we really need to focus on is the skilling or the reskilling or the upskilling that is required. And in this, I have an idea that is slightly at variance with many others because I do not think we need to train people specifically for overseas. We should be in a position that we train people for the economy in India, which is also getting more and more sophisticated. But we then give them those additional bits that will make them more attractive overseas. Because the moment we try and train people only from overseas, we are probably building in a level of expectations and requirements that become an extremely expensive management system. We should treat this as something that is on way. In the central government, we have a small committee which includes my colleagues, my fellow secretaries in the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Ministry of Higher Education, Ministry of School Education, and the Ministry of Labor. And we form a committee in which we have realized that at the school level, we need to introduce young people to the idea of learning a foreign language. In other words, when they think about a foreign language, they can also start about thinking, go overseas. And it should not be like a compulsion that you have Spanish or Japanese or Korean, but it is something that you take on as a matter of choice and interest. And then when you come to the level at secondary school, when you are looking at vocational or skill training, and that is something, the language component, which can then be upgraded to meet the requirements. So I think what we need to do today is to upgrade our skill levels. And in many ways, they already are. And NSTC's done fantastic work on this, such that they meet with the requirements of most countries. And in those where we will need a little more, we can have an upskilling module where they can be trained specifically, let us say, for Australia or Canada, which are very open markets with well-defined parameters of skills, or the new markets which are coming up, like Japan and Mauritius and Portugal, Korea, and you're going to have soon, great possibilities along the Mediterranean coast in Europe when we conclude these agreements that we are negotiating with them. So I would ask you to look at it from a slightly different perspective and not just purely from the context of training people for overseas. The second is the skilling must be certified so that they can be understood, not necessarily always recognized, but that they can be understood overseas. Of course, the objective would be to get prior recognition and all that. But as a beginning, they should be understood. I think the reputation of our skill councils has been growing. NSTC, again, I must mention, has played a very leading role in this. And the third element of the skilling aspect, or what I would say the competency package, would be the soft one, which includes language. And I think this we need to integrate right from the school stage onwards. Many of the institutions that I have interacted with have looked at how important this element is and how they've been working on it. So, my last word with which I would wish to conclude is that we need to change our paradigm and our approach from looking at traditional unskilled or low skilled movements to traditional markets in the Gulf to a platform where we are focused more on skilled movements and particularly preparing for the new destinations, which I have just defined. And uh, there is a huge opportunity that is awaiting us. You know, many of the skilled workers or unskilled workers who go to the Gulf region get nearly $300 to $400, and if you were to go to Japan, you would probably get a minimum of $2,000. So that is the range of difference that these movements to the new destinations, to Eastern Asia, to Europe, to Canada and Australia will provide. So I once again thank Surabhi and ICM for putting together this very exciting panel. I look forward to the outcomes, and we wish to assure you that we will continue to be deeply engaged with all stakeholders, and all that you say will continue to be a very valuable input towards policy making, because we do believe that an empowered set of migrants, both workers and professionals, will only come through this greater consultation process. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the views that come up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for really laying the groundwork of today's discussion by focusing not just on how the skills need to be broadened by with a mix of language and certification, but also how training should just not be focused on the overseas market, but training should happen in a way that our people are employable within the country as well. As we move forward in the discussion, let me introduce our moderator for the day, Dr. Meera Sethi. Dr. Sethi has over 35 years of experience in international, regional, and national level in Africa, Middle East, South Asia, with a track record of leading humanitarian development and migration management. She retired in 2017 as Director General Special Envoy to India with International Organization for Migration. She's worked extensively with IOs, and she's written extensively on the topic as well. Currently, she teaches at many universities and colleges on migration policy, governance, and so on, and has also authored the baseline report with as a consultant for ICMPD in the India-EU corridor. So over to you, Dr. Sethi, to moderate the discussion. I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you for those words. And let me pick on what our secretary has just said on a need for a shift in paradigm, moving away from the mindset of being Gulf-centric, looking at new markets. And I think the first two meetings, and this being the third virtual consultation, have very clearly pointed out that we need more information on what the skill sets are. We need more surveys. We need more linkage from training as well as the educational institutions, more coordination, more cooperation at the interstate level to see what skills are needed in the country. As the secretary rightly pointed out, it's just not overseas, but we need to look at skills within the country because of the fast track, the changes taking place. And I think When you look at what's happening in the destination side, it's very interesting. I just found a very interesting article which talks of a global battle going on for looking for new people. So this virtual consultation today is timely, very much needed, and I'm so glad this is the third one. I was not part of the first two. And when you look at some of the data that's coming out, we look at Canada wanting 1.2 million migrant workers. Australia wants to double its figures. Israel has already entered into an agreement for health and social care workers with Nepal. We have UK, which has come out with a new Immigration Act 2000 just recently to basically fast track its workers. So fast tracking, fast tracking of visas, fast tracking of work permits, many changes are taking place. Last year, we were all talking about the numbers that were returning. But this year, we really need to focus on the new markets. They are coming up very clearly. I could give you a list of data right now, but perhaps let's listen to our speakers, and then we can continue with that. We have quite a versatile panel, and as the secretary said, we do have people from the private sector here today. And our first speaker for the day is Ms. Soma Sharma, who's from NSDC and who's the head of the Market Analytics and Knowledge Department. And very much her work is focused on looking at new data, looking at some evidence-based decision-making in bringing into the skill ecosystem. So let me call on our first speaker. You have 10 minutes and give us the highlights. And as you heard our secretary give you some very good background points, let's try and highlight those further. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mercedes. So I'll use a PowerPoint presentation. So allow me to share a presentation. Yeah, so is the presentation visible?
Yeah.
All right. So I'll go
Yes,
ahead.
it is.
Okay, great. So I'll go ahead. Labor market and the kind of analytics we do here at NSDC to try and identify, to try and respond to different problem statements that we have. Like, for example, how do we identify target segments for skilling? I am going to start with talking about the India context and then move on to a study that we've done for global labor markets. I thought I'll just lay out the context by talking about some of the data and the analytics that we get from analyzing the data of labor market surveys that happen in India. So India conducts this annual labor market survey called the Periodic Labor Force Survey, which talks about the labor force in India as well as the unemployment scenario in India. The idea behind this analysis is to try and get some insights on which are the target segments for skilling, what is the need for differentiated strategies for skilling, and how these insights on labor markets can help us plan and design different skilling interventions. So this is just to give you an overview of India's labor market. So the idea here is that our working age population in India consists of the labor force, which forms 57% of the working age population, the not in employment, education and training segment, as well as students. So if you look at the labor force and the employed category within the labor force, around 94.8% of the labor force is currently employed as per the latest data. What we find is that a majority of them are school educated. So you see in the graph at the left hand side that 52.9% of the employed population is 10 standard and below educated, and graduates form only 12.9% of the employed population. So if you look at the unemployed segment, there is a roughly equal distribution between graduates as well as the school educated. So there's a need, of course, skilling strategies will be different for those who studied only in up to school level and for those who are graduates and above. So there's a need, this kind of data helps us understand the need for differentiated skilling strategies. If we look at the NEET population, which is not in employment, education, or training, 96% of the NEET population in India comprises women. This is primarily happening because of very low labor force participation by women in India, female labor force participation in India. So therefore, there is a need for gender-driven and women-focused strategies in skilling. So this was just giving an overview of the working age population in India and how it's segmented by education, by age group, and by gender, and how this can help us derive insights for future skilling interventions. If I talked about identification of target segments, I mentioned NEET women. So what we find is that working age NEET women in India, a large majority of them are actually school educated. They're very small segment that is graduate and above. So our skilling strategies that are focused on women also need to be differentiated accordingly by different segments. If we look at the employed women, then a very large segment is school educated, a smaller segment is graduate and above. But if you look at unemployed women, then there's a very large segment, according to the data, it's 67.2.9%, which is graduates and above. So in unemployed women, there's a very high proportion of graduates and college educated women. But if we look at employed women, there's a high proportion of school educated and women. So why do we look at the employed category? It's because the employed category may also need skilling, reskilling, and upskilling in order to upgrade their earning capacity, in order to move on to more higher paying jobs, and so on. So this kind of data helps us understand the wider skilling landscape and the need for skilling interventions and the differentiation that is required in them. If we look at the data for the population in India, we find that there's a large segment of youth population in India. So 15 to 20, 21 to 30 age group, that comprises around 55% of India's population. Actually, the age group that is below 30 years of age, the youth comprises 55% of India's population. The working age population, half of which is women, a large segment is only school educated. Now, moving on to what implications does this have for our global migration strategies and for overseas work employment opportunities? Given this large segment of youth population in India, of course, India can be a huge source of manpower for different countries abroad. So accordingly, if we try and understand what are the overseas opportunities for skilled manpower from India, so that's what our NSDC had undertaken a study, a global skill gap study on overseas work opportunities for skilled manpower from India. The idea was that how do we of course, for that, the population, the skilled manpower needs to have market relevant skills training so that the employment that they get in overseas markets is gainful and productive and enables a higher income earning capacity. The study basically looked at countries that have that face a labor shortage because of reasons such as falling population, a rising median age, and what they can do to attract economic migrants, because they have various levers that they can use to increase their economic growth. They can look at ways to increase the labor force participation rate. They can look at increasing retirement age. But economic migrants can be a key lever for raising GDP growth in countries which are facing labor shortages. So therefore, this global skill gap study that NSDC undertook focused on looking at economic migrants as a lever to raise economic activity in the country. For this global skill gap study, these countries were selected using a very objective criteria. The criteria was based on the attractiveness of a country in general for migrants, and also the attractiveness of countries for Indian migrants in particular. So a number of indicators were used, like, for example, what is the current size of migrant population in these countries, what is their GDP growth rate, what is their FDI inflows, how attractive are they for businesses. A number of indicators were used in an objective way to identify 15 countries for this deep dive study. And countries were also, the G2G interactions and different relations with countries were also considered to come up with this short list of 15 countries. These countries countries were grouped into 5 categories. There were European countries, which comprised Germany, Netherlands, UK, Sweden, Switzerland. Countries with more developed migration systems, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, and Japan, as well as GCC countries, which 3 of them were shortlisted: UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Malaysia was another country that was studied in this global skill gap study. The idea behind this study was to look at, ultimately arrive at some estimates for what is the projected demand in these countries across different sectors, across different job roles, and therefore what are the opportunities for skilled workers from India. So overall, what at a very conservative estimate, what this study provided was numbers for that could potentially be number of opportunities that could present a potential for skilled workers from India. For GCC nations, the number was 26.34, estimated at 26.34. A number of European nations, it was 1.3 lakh. For nations with advanced migration systems that were studied in this report, it was 4.25 lakhs. And this was over the next 5 years. So what I'll now just quickly do is just to give an overview of how.
Sorry, you have just a few more minutes, Ms. Sharma.
Yeah.
Just give us the highlights, the conclusions, please.
Absolutely. I'll finish very quickly. So what I just want to do is explain how the study was conducted, in the sense that what are the key parameters that the study focused on, and therefore how we arrived at the overall numbers that I just presented. So I'll just give an example. For EU, the different data sources were consulted to arrive at what are the projected job openings. So CEDEFOP is a very good platform that provides data for EU countries, and what it found was that over the long term, job openings projected in EU would long term till to 2030, it was 151 million. This would be a combination of replacement demand as well as new demand. Now, for different countries, Germany is just an example of one of the countries that was studied. The reason I'm showing this is just to give an overview of what the study focused on. It looked at the demographic profile of Germany. It looked at the economic profile of Germany. Looked at the current migrant profile of Germany, and the current Indian migrant profile. So, which are the states from which Indians migrate to Germany? The states were Punjab, Gujarat, West Bengal, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh. Then the study looked at and estimated the projected job openings for migrants across different sectors and across different occupations. And these numbers were then aggregated. I'm just moving on very quickly. These numbers were then aggregated to see what are the job opportunities that skilled workers from India could be considered for across different sectors. Looking at all the European countries that were a part of the study, for these 5 European countries, it was found that there's a projected opportunity of 2.6 to 3 lakhs over the next 10 to 12 years across the 5 European countries considered in the study. Across based on consultations with stakeholders, based on different data sources, it was found that these are the job roles that are of high potential in these countries and where one could potentially focus on. Similarly, the study then looked at the three GCC countries that were identified for the study. It was found that migrants form a very significant part of the economy of these GCC countries. I won't go into the data here, but basically 52% of the GCC population consists of migrants. That's what the study found. One of the GCC countries that was looked at was the UAE. A similar demographic, economic, and migrant profile was undertaken for UAE and the other 2 GCC countries that were considered in the study. The opportunity that was found in the UAE across different sectors was found by looking at the replacement demand and the new demand, and how much of that opportunity could be potentially captured by migrants from India. And if we look at the different sectors that could potentially be targeted for Indian migrants. This was the job role wise listing. So, for example, in the UAE, it was found that mason, furniture carpenter, electrician, steel fixers, and so on. These are the job roles that could be looked at for job opportunities. Another part of the study was, and we looked at the ECR countries. So there is data available on which are the states in India from which the migrants go to the ECR countries. And it was found that 13 states contribute to 96% of ECR migration from India. This was data based on 2011 to 2017 migration. And the state from which the most migrants went was Uttar Pradesh, Kerala, Bihar, Tamil Nadu. And the study also looked at a profile of these states, each of these states. So I'm just giving an example of the profile that the study presented for one state, which is Uttar Pradesh. So here we could see which are the districts in Uttar Pradesh which are sending out migrants, which are the job roles which are from Uttar Pradesh, and so on. The last category of countries is basically the countries which have more advanced migration systems. The processes there include a credentials review where one's education and experience is looked at, a theoretical test is conducted, a practical test is conducted, and then candidates are admitted to the host countries. They are trained on their technical occupational standards, and that's the sort of broad overview of the migration system of these countries. So I won't go into these details here, just skip. And lastly, the study also had a number of recommendations for these different blocks of countries. So, for example, one key recommendation is, of course, we prioritize sectors and job roles basis the report findings. How do we establish standards and training requirements that meet the requirement of these countries? We look at signing MOUs and agreements with sector associations, initiate G2G interactions, and so on. For GCC, it was found to be important to establish equivalence between NSQFs and the proposed standards in the Gulf countries. How do we establish? It was recommended that testing centers in PPP model be established, and so on. Similarly, for the countries with well-established systems, it was recommended that testing centers be set up in India for the other countries. And these were some of the recommendations that the report talked about. So I'll just end here because of shortage of time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma. And I'm really sorry. That's a very rich, comprehensive study, which really requires a lot of time. And I'm sorry to really squeeze you in this short time.
No,
All right,
thank
let me call on our next speaker, Mr. Rajiv Gupta, who also is doing some very interesting work in the private sector, and he has diverse business interests. And I think what's really crucial for our meeting today and the region that we are covering is that he has set up Northeast India's first Japan-focused education services enterprise. And I think over to you, Mr. Gupta.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meera Sethi.
Please keep the time in mind.
Yeah, I will. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for getting me onto this panel. And I would like to share some insights. I don't have a PPT, but I'll just try to share some insights from an operational point of view that we are focused on. Number one, our area of focus is Japan. As respected Secretary Sir did mention, that Japan is today an emerging market for Indian, whatever we call, whether we call the labor market or whether we call skilled workers, whatever name that we would like to give it. Number one. Number two, he also mentioned that Japan is looking at the Northeast as one of the potential areas. For the understanding of others who have not know Northeast well enough, we can understand that why Japan is looking at Northeast. Its affinity to the culture, it's the looks, it's the ability to assimilate into the society there, food habits, and also, if you look at the youth of the Northeast, two things that they love about Japan is their culture with respect to anime and manga. Anime and manga are two cultural aspects of Japan which are very strong. Of course, as we all know, in the youth of today, there is the Korean pop, which beats the Japanese pop. So it's more K-pop than J-pop. But still, there is anime and manga. The unfortunate part here is the liking for anime and manga as a hobby, or as one would say, professionally doing it with respect to Coscope and multiple other activities, is not getting converted into the love for profession. So therefore, one of the very, very weak links with respect to Northeast is converting people to understand that there is a great scope for them to get into Japan as a country from a professional point of view. also, there is a learning curve. Secretary Sir did mention that it is not only about skilling, it is skilling plus plus. Japan, as we know, is a first world country. Japan, as we know, is also very, very highly conscious on quality. From my own small personal experience, and what drove me to the love of Japan was actually exporting fresh flowers from India. And one can imagine, what would be the level of quality that they actually demanded. And that's what instilled that what quality really means. And when we look at worker as the word implies, unfortunately, from an Indian perspective, we have never looked at quality in terms of worker. It's as long as somebody can just do the work. Japan today does require a large proportion of workers, whether you call it elder care, agriculture, manufacturing, machining, etc., multiple trades. The training part is very important. And the training is an A to Z category. As was mentioned earlier, that if we pick the people in school, at least we will imbibe language. Nothing can be done in Japan without language, as we all know. 99% of the Japanese don't speak any second language apart from Japanese. And therefore, language becomes a very, very important portion. Number two is the domain skill. We, for ourselves at JSEX, what we are trying to do is, as a first advantage we want to take, is look at the domain skills already acquired. So, for example, if we are looking at elder cares people to be provided to Japan, we are looking at graduates coming out of the nursing institutions. As you would know, that healthcare in India has been also very demanding, and the last 2 years have put a high pressure on the healthcare system in India. And therefore, there is an actual demand for the healthcare profession. There's no nurse that graduates, whether from a 2-year program, 3-year program, or a 4-year program, who doesn't get a job. But the question here lies on one very big factor. Does that job that they get in India really make an impact on their society? No, because the amount of remuneration that they are deriving here just makes them get them 2 square meals, or pay for the loans that they took to get their education, or help their families to maybe maybe train another sibling, etc. Migration into these, let's look at Japan as we are talking about it, would give them a salary structure which would help in saving, at least in Indian rupees, if not more, 7 to 8 lakhs per year, which over a 5-year period is definitely going to make a large impact on the society. When we look at Northeast in particular, it's got aspiration. It's got people who want to today do much beyond what they can get in their own environment. However, we have to create a clear passage for them. The first passage with respect to Japan is Japanese language training. The second is adequate quality of skill training. The NSDC report, which I was just observing just now, mentioned a large proportion of people who would like to be trained are from the class 10 category. And we must understand that many of these countries demand that for visa purposes, they need minimum class 12, that is high school graduates. So can we put in certain skilling proportions at the high school level so that when they graduate, they actually look at vocation and skilling as one of the great opportunities? Unfortunately, our education system and the inverted commas graduate, is your son and daughter a graduate, has actually made us a non-DIY society, right? When we look at Japan, Japan is today 87.5% DIY, whereas in India, we are 4.7%. I'm speaking of statistics that I've read. And therefore, there's a huge difference in our ability to be able to offer our skills. So therefore, we pick up the kids or the youth from the institutions where they have derived these skills, train them on language. And I don't mean that just, training them on language means passing an exam. We must all understand that language proficiency means high quality of communication. Therefore, we should have enough patience, enough time, and enough we should have a program which ensures that that level of proficiency is reached. When we speak of Japan, we have a Japanese language proficiency test like we have for English, IELTS, etc. However, as Indians, we are very good at multi-choice questions. So we pass the test. Can we speak? Can we communicate? There is question marks around it. So therefore, as a private institution, the objective has to be actually to place and give a high impetus on quality. The country where the kids or the youth are going or are proposed to go should then actually look at you, I would say, in using the terms, as a production center of really, really giving high quality human capital. And that is where I feel will go a long way in both when they come back to India, offering the same services to us, which will be of high quality, giving the repatriation money which they get to impact their own societies, homes, villages, etc. And of course, their thinking, their ability, etc. And they would be actually capable in the outside world. So this, I would say, is our main focus as an education services institution based in the Northeast. We are definitely focused at the moment completely on Japan. The government of India has 2 MOUs in place, the TITP program and now the SSW program. We see also from a Japan side, there is a new interest in various domains out of India. One of the reasons is we must understand that for the last over 20 years or maybe 2 decades, a little over, they have been getting enough people from other Southeast Asian countries, especially Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia. So there is a whole one generation that has already gone to that country.
We have to.
Yeah. So therefore, today, if we are able to provide good quality skill, we will have an edge over those nations going forward and the future. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and happy to answer any questions that may arise.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. And yes, you've just hit the nail on the head. It is the high quality of training, and of course, language is very, very important. And this has to begin much earlier than what we anticipate, as it is being done right now. All right, since we are really quite, we're getting close to 4 o'clock, and our next speaker, our third panelist, is Mr. Mehdi, who brings in the academic perspective and having just recently done a lot of research covering a large amount of SMEs and micro institutes also in the Assam district. And so we'd like to hear a little bit about your work. And please, I know as we get closer to our last panel, we'll have very little time. So give us the highlights and try and add on to what the other speakers have said. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Hello, good afternoon. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Miyazaki. And it was a really learning experience that, I just listened properly to Mr. Rajiv Gupta. It was quite interesting. If time permits, I'll definitely meet him. Anyway, let me start. I'm going to take the presentation. In that presentation, this presentation is basically based on my PhD that I'm going to submit on 20th December. So, let me just...
Mr. Mehdi, do you want us to run your PPT?
Yeah. I hope this is visible to you now, ma'am. Yeah. Is this visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Thank you. Before starting the presentation, just let me just give a glimpse on that what exactly I'm going to just start. So this was about this Presentation includes the contents that I recently surveyed approximately more than 300 micro, small, and medium enterprises in the several districts of Assam as part of my PhD thesis. And when I get the mail from the ICMM, I thought that I should start my topic on this presentation. So let me just highlight you at the beginning that I'll be talking about types of skilling, that what kind of types of skilling is required and skilling required for migration. The district that I have surveyed, that was approximately 6 districts in Assam that covers your Upper Assam, Jorhat, Dibrugarh, Sibsagar, and in Middle Assam, Nagaon, then Barpeta and Kamrup Rural. That covers mostly your industries like brass metal, bell metal, then Assamese ornaments jewelry, then your stone crushing industry, welding fabrication, different kinds of industry, including your silk, muga silk, etc. as well. So when you talk about, let me first define the types of skilling, then I'll just connect this with the different kind of industry, what they are doing. When you talk about the types of skilling, there are three kind of types of skilling: specialty, new skills, and skill upgradation. So what I found that the most of the enterprises and artisans in the state of Assam, the district that I covered, have found they are good in terms of technical and specific knowledge. But however, already Mr. Gupta has pointed out two things, that one is the language, that I found that the language is one of the critical issue here. In addition to that, to the business knowledge, like when I found that most of the enterprises, they are lacking in terms of they do not have the proper financial documents. They do not maintain any record, etc. Then the second one that points, that highlights the new skills. When we talk about the new skills, this emphasizing on training centers. Most of the places, though that is there physically, but that is not in working condition. For example, if you talk about Assamese gold jewelry in Nagaon district, so there is a workshop, but adequate training support is not there. Then another important thing is the skill upgradation. What I found that, Kamrup Rural, there is a brass metal industry. So what these people are doing, they are doing everything in manually. I would enter operations, they are doing manually. Even those brass metal kind of those devices, they are doing this manually. So which can be converted into technology oriented, way of aiding them and increasing the profitability as well as reducing time. The institutes can help them, the concerned institutes. So that was about briefly about specialty, new skills, and skill upgradation. Now, what exactly required when you talk about skill mapping and gap? What I found that mostly we need to incorporate them the new skills and skill upgradation. If you just look into this, this is a CAN-based. They are using the CAN-based devices. It's a bamboo-based products. This is the knife cluster in Johar. This is in Haju, Kamrup Rural. They are using the brass metal. And this is the bell metal in Satyawadi, Barpeta districts. So these are part of my, primary study. Now, let me just take you to that. The first, handloom and handicraft sector. When surveyed that, what exactly we found that basic role of the handloom sector is produce quality handloom, but you know that these people, they are just doing the red and white combination of products. When they're designing, the color combination is only red and white. They're not capable to create a different design, different color combination, lack of knowledge in terms of the new technology, and even to compete within the market, the domestic in terms of the product differentiation is a concern for them. However, in the similar lines, artisans using bale metal to create different artists. So this is about the bale metal industry. Finishing skills, one of the issue with them. The proper finishing they are not able to provide to those products. And the different kind of designs, whatever the traditional designs, they're just flowing that. So these are the certain gaps. Then in terms of food processing, when you talk about food processing bakery industry, I have divided in bakery and processing like food, vegetables, that is pickles. Basically, in that second segment is the pickles. Now, in food processing, maintaining hygiene, then use modern machines or technologies, again, crucial issue. They don't know how to operate those machines that I found in Dibrugarh districts. Then in lack of that in food processing units, most of the units are running by the self-help group, and the women's are there, the major entrepreneurs are the women's in processing fruits or vegetables. When we talk about mostly they are selling the pickles in the market. So the crucial issue for them is the preservation and processing technologies. Packaging is one of the biggest concerns. They are not able to offer the attractive packaging to the customer. Just a simple polythene bag they are using, and somewhere they are, just, some small tag like 50 rupees or 30 rupees, they are just putting on that. Visually attractive, they're not in a position to offer that. So these are again certain gaps. When we talk about in terms of the hotel, inability to speak in English is one of the crucial issue. We go through except the Kaziranga National Park zone, except that area, if you go to the other areas, this comes, I'm not considering here the Guwahati city because this becomes a cosmopolitan. But if you go to the other areas, this becomes a crucial issue. Low computer literacy and understanding of different cultures. So as a hotels or service provider, the person should be familiar with those aspects. They should be multitasking. So there's again lacking in terms of the skill sets. So what I did, I combined all these industry sectors together, and I have, created a matrix like when we talk about the handloom sectors, specialty skills is also required because most of the people they are leaving due to the low wages. Per day wages is approximately 300 or 350, and most of the workers in this area, this handloom sector, is the women. So what we can do, we can allow them to improve their new skills, skill upgradation. When I visited the Swalkusi skill, yeah, that silk, those in the units, then I found that they are having a huge market. Even you can talk about the people from Japan, Europe, USA, they prefer those handmade products. So what I can understand that I've not studied those that part. The international exposure. But what I can say that there will be a proper treatment if we allow them to improve their new skill set or skill upgradation. They can be a very good migrator to certain countries. Then brass metal again, specialty skills, new skills and skill upgradation. For the food processing units, they mostly require new skills and skill upgradation. Again, in terms of the fruits and vegetables, basically here we are talking about the juices, fruit, vegetable waste of fruits, the juices, then pickles, etc. New skills and skill upgradation. In hotels, it's a new skills, and again in hospitality sector, this is about the new skills. So this is all about from my side. That entire this presentation is based on my this survey of more than 300, at least 312 numbers of MSMEs that I have visited across the state of Assam, from Upper Assam to the Lower Assam, considering these different segments of your artisans, then your micro entrepreneurs. What I found that mostly, these people, native of Assam, what I found that my people, and we are very good in terms of those technical and specific, areas. But what we need are the finishing skills. Then I think they would be employable. Then we can bring them up to that global standard, which make which probably help them to earn a better profit or revenue. Specifically, if you have any time, I may suggest you go to see that, but there's a very good artisans as well across the states. They made basically, that the handmade jewelries. It's basically they used to, flatten that entire gold into smaller, like that we use the Kaju Borfi and those devices silver plates used to they put. The similar line they put that gold plate, and manually they are putting those into the different necklaces. So that cost approximately 4,000, 5,000 rupees, and one set maybe 2,000. Rajiv sir probably knowing about this is near to Ranthali, this place is, but what they need a finishing skills. They need a finishing skills. They need the knowledge of marketing. They need the knowledge of finance, and they need that your supply customer that relationship building. So it is not only about the technical or operational skills. What I found that apart from that, they need that business and the communication, etc. Thank you. Thank you. This is all about from my side. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mehdi. This is very useful, and this is not only applicable to your region, but this really would apply, this research would also apply to other regions, because the key here that, as you mentioned, is that are these workers, can they be certified by, are they basically following international standards? So if we want to participate in the global labor market, we really need to upgrade our training and bring them up to the international standards to compete in the global market. So thank you very much. It was very useful. And I call on our last panelist, Mr. Kishore Das, who's a regional manager of Don Bosco Technical Society, also engaged in high-level capacity building and building human capital for the Northeast region. So let's hear his perspective now. Over to you, sir.
Hello, good evening, and it's indeed a pleasure for us to be participating in this short webinar by ICM. In fact, the time is very short. There is a lot to be shared. Just to start with the introduction, I would like to, many of you may be knowing it, but like to mention that Northeast is actually a hill of talent. We have a host of talent, and if we really count, we have been talking about talents and skills which are country specific, which are qualification specific. Network. Can you hear me? I had some disturbance in between.
Yes, there is some disturbance, but I think maybe you could keep your video off. Let's hope that'll be better.
Okay. Okay, sure, we'll do that. So basically speaking, Northeast is a heel of all the talents that I was talking about. We have certain advantages in terms of literacy rate, in terms of English speaking, in terms of being presentable to the rest of the world. We have advantages when I say in terms of speaking English. Now, a student who is in class 8 or in standard 10 can speak a very fluent English, which is actually a requirement of an English teacher in Laos, Vietnam, or Cambodia, which is not applicable to the rest of the country. We also can be a very good English teacher in terms of China offering a very good package and salary for English teachers. But somehow, I don't know, because of diplomatic policies or whatever it could be, they look for the teachers from Canada, New Zealand, or UK, and things like that. So looking from that perspective, we have a lot of scopes, and also opening up of economies, and we have the skills that is required for the world. Unfortunately, when it comes to Northeast, most of the time what happens is that the thing rolls up to Kolkata or maybe up to Guwahati, and beyond that, it really reaches to the young people in the region. Our people, as some of our previous speakers have already mentioned, Mr. Rajiv has mentioned that the skills that they have for K-pop or something of that sort, and the way they are occupied in social media platforms and things like that, they are very much excited. They are very much, filled with passion actually to go out and work. I have people within my own family who are even ready to go out just for the sake of volunteering, to get exposed, to learn new things, and to see the world and bring it back to the region. Whereas when we talk about connectivity, we should know that we hardly have only 2 international airports. One is in Imphal, another one is in Guwahati. And unfortunately, we have, prior to COVID, let's talk about prior to COVID, these 2 airports had only 1 or 2 destinations on card. Looking at Kolkata, our next big hope that we look into, you should also see the connectivity in Kolkata, the number of international flights being dropped year after year. 10 years back, there were British Airways, there was Lufthansa connecting all over the globe. But today we hardly have flights which are going to just 3 or 4 destinations, which are just close by. Looking all these things. Now, we should also understand that the community here is very close. We feel very connected. And I've also traveled to many of the countries, and I found that people are actually fond of Northeast people. I don't know, because of the physical features or some other things. Even in Bhutan, they prefer more tourists from Northeast when it comes to, you know, overall thing. Somehow they feel the connection. All those factors play a big role. However, we, as I mentioned previously, somehow the things needs to open up. There are lack of linkages. The passages needs to open up. I don't know if how many of us here in this meeting actually know when I talk about connectivity. You all may be knowing that around 4 to 5 years back, India has actually opened up its prepaid cell phone connections to have international roaming facilities. But I'm sad to say that that facility is not applicable for the SIM cards which are issued from Northeast. So how do we, you know, look into this kind of things, this challenges? Because when the people go out, they really want to remain connected with their family. They, you know, all those kind of feelings are there. People from Northeast are more creative. I have my own friends, my classmates, my colleagues who were working with me in the same sector. Today they have gone to, you know, different parts of the world. They are doing very well. At age 30 and above, they have learned 3-4 languages. And all these things. However, we are very hopeful, and I'm very optimistic, because also of the fact that there is the new education policy which speaks about skilling people, the youngsters from age, standard 6 and above, which was never there before. I hope this kind of skilling added with the government initiatives and the interest of the government to increase the skilling capacity of the youngsters will definitely open up a way. And also looking at the different, it will take a lot of time. I don't want to get into the details about, because many of the speakers have already spoken. For example, Japan, or let's talk about in the Gulf or things like that. One good thing that I have also observed when I say about requirements, about the need, that what we need here is that language institutes, which Mr. Rajiv has mentioned. And also I have seen that actually JX had a program with us somewhere in 2019, if I don't know if you remembers or not, where we were having a basic orientation for the youth with the Japanese culture. There were people who came from Japan. And also we need to have some more direct recruitment agencies based in Northeast. As Don Bosco Tech, we do have India International Center for Skill Training, where we have direct recruitments, where people from Gulf and other places comes and do it. We have also been part of the PDOT orientation that one of the speakers have mentioned earlier. We are also looking to have PDOT orientation in collaboration with IOM. We have a project for that, and we are looking for it. We are basically going to have it in 8 cities. Guwahati is one of them in Northeast. And also the specific skill workers we are looking into. So all these things, I think, added with the challenges, the new policies of the government, I think we need to leverage more on the linkages that is there. We need to have more recruiters, more agencies, more international governments, entities, both private and government, to come more close to Northeast. I should say that, needless to say, that Northeast is very diverse. I am right now in Dimapur in Nagaland. Nagaland itself is very diverse. You go to all other states, Mizoram, and we have very few opportunity. Again, once again, let me recap it. When it comes to opportunity industry, we have very few. It's only in Assam we have few industries, and apart from Assam, if you see the rest of the Northeast, we hardly have any opportunities. Most of the youth, most of the youngsters are very much excited, fully engaged in social media. They know what is happening around, but they don't get an opportunity. That leads to frustration also, that leads to hopelessness. That, I mean, all those things are again correlated. Again, that's all related. That's what I like to say. So looking forward with this kind of consultation, if you can help us to leverage with connections, with leveraging the opportunities, and making possible that more recruiters come directly to the region, interact with the people concerned, and also see, because it makes a lot of difference when you should think that when a young person, a youngster who is just 30 or maybe 25, 20 years is going to, let's say, Tokyo, he has to go all the way from Nagaland to Delhi. So going from Nagaland to Delhi itself is like, if you are in EU, you are crossing around 7 to 8 countries. the kilometer in distance. There is also a lot of differences and things that I found even in the visa policies of these countries. For example, I had my personal experience with Japanese visa as a tourist visa that I applied for. Usually, being from eastern part of the country, we are supposed to get our visa from Kolkata, but somehow when they said northeast, they said that you have to come to Delhi. Then also again, they said that you have to come for interview. Now, this is not required for the people from rest of India, but somehow I don't know, they wanted to see me or what. I mean, it's just that way back in 2015 it happened. So these are some of the things that I have observed. I just like to live with this, but requesting, I mean, this is my urge, and that if it's possible, that if you can help us to link with more entities, more firms, more organizations, which can help us really to have a recruitment policy or recruitment things happening right from Northeast, from the states itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I fully understand your points of view, that the issues of connectivity and the issues of promoting and the issues of harmonization of policies, whether they concern visas, whether they concern setting up more institutions, or is very important. And this is something I think would be written down as one of the issues that have come up. So thank you very much for providing us also in another perspective. And as you can see, we have 15 minutes left, but I assume Dr. Surbhi Singh would give us a little bit more time. I'd like to open the floor for discussion, and perhaps we could take 2 or 3 questions at the most. So if anybody has any burning question, please introduce yourself, and you can raise, and you can also mention to who you would like to address this question to. Over to you. Right. So, do we have anything in the chat, Surbhi?
No, Meera.
No. Okay. All right. Well, I'd like each of the speakers, since we had, had to rush you through, perhaps give you each a minute each to maybe, in light of all what previous speakers have said, to bring in a perspective that you feel would be essential for this meeting. And then we could start from perhaps I could call on Mr. Rajiv Gupta to maybe make an intervention of 1 or 2 minutes here. And then I'll go on to Ms. Sharma for the next one. Over to you, Mr. Gupta.
Yeah, so,
Just 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, please.
Great. I think taking forward from what I had to say, and, Mr. Mehdi and Mr. Kishore Das both had some things to say about both skill as well as the intervention. One of the factors when we are talking, again, I'm focusing back to Japan, where we are focused on, is, and as I said, that it's very important that we look at it from an A to Z service, as Mr. Kishore Das said about having recruiters, etc. So,
right. Okay, I think there's a problem with the sound. Perhaps there's a question in the chat for Ms. Ms. Sharma. Are you there?
Perhaps, Meera, you can come back to him later.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, what is NSD and the government doing related to aligning our training to international occupational standards? So I give you 1 minute for that, please.
Sure, sure. So NSDC has a team that works on international collaborations, and there are a number of projects that the team works on. And while they would be best placed to respond to this query, but I'll just give I know that NSDC team is working to aligning standards with countries such as the UAE, and they're working towards this effort. And there are a number of programs that NSDC is working on in partnership with the governments. But any specific queries that the participant has, I'd be happy to connect them with the relevant team at NSDC, and they'd be giving more details for that.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Gupta, we lost you, but do you have anything to just finish up what you were saying?
I would say that there is a government intervention required into this A to Z service. One is that if there is a funding possibility, there is funds required. People do have a tendency not to realize the impact that they would make after the revenue they earn, and therefore investing. Even when we look at Japanese language as particular, there is a huge resistance of the investment required to learn the language, spend that many number of months, time, hours, etc. So if there is a possibility of some sort of leverage or support from the government, it would really help in also again creating good quality manpower.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. Could we ask Mr. Mehdi if you have anything to add here? Any last one point?
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for again giving me time. So, I mean, what I can comment here that government or that concerned agencies should build certain that training institutes, those who are even at present time is in non-working conditions, though we have those your different ITIs and polytechnics are there, the actually looking into the market need, what exactly the market is looking or international market is looking, that kind of facility should be offered to that. And not only, I mean, it would be difficult for those natives. So basically, for if I say that a person who is just from generation to generation is working on say gold jewelry or handmade gold jewelry, suddenly you will go and ask him to focus on the computers, he will run away from you. This is a practical thing that I found when we went for the awareness. So we have to give them something like bridge or add-on kind of activity. So more focus should be his core competence. When we talk about the core competence, a competitive advantage, we should focus on that, but at the same time, certain amount of that either you can talk about the language or business, there should be that the basic communication he should be eligible for that. That is all about from my side. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I see a question in the chat, and of course, only if time permits, but is basically asking of how women can be integrated better into the current skilling ecosystem on two fronts: new job roles and new destinations. Um, if I may take the opportunity to just highlight one point here and indulge, if you don't mind, for 1 minute. I think a new area that is coming up very, very clearly, and it's evident from all the changes of policies that are taking place in the European countries, is what we call home care workers, caregivers. And I know that Mr. Gupta mentioned something about nurses, but actually there's a distinction that is being made in the European market. It's not nurses, it is really looking for caregivers, which are home-based. Now, some countries are already having institutional frameworks where institution to institution agreements are being made. But then there are some countries who are doing private recruitment where a person goes and works in a home, which is not regulated. There is not much framework to basically prescribe or harmonize that. But this is definitely an emerging area for women, which requires a lot of training. And this is coming up in a big way. There's a lot of documentation. I would encourage you to look at some very recent study done by OECD and also WHO on the need for caregivers, which is an emerging market. So with that, I have to also call on our last panelist just to say one line, 1 minute to you, Mr. Das, and then I hand over to Surbi for the closing.
Yes. In addition to what all I said, one last line that I would like to conclude is basically on the pre-departure orientation, what we call it as PDOT. I hope that this can help us resolve a lot of issues and make people familiarize and assimilate with the culture, interest, choice, taste of the destination countries. We have had similar trainings in the past, and right now, as I said, with IOM, we have one proposal in the pipeline. So if something like that can be made across to us as a skilling institute, that this many number of people are going abroad from Guwahati or from Kolkata, and if you can give a pre-departure orientation for this many days or something like that, I hope that will add a great value to the people who are going out, and that will help them to even sustain in their job, and also create more effective, productive line of work when they are there abroad. That is what I would like to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their presentations, and I'm sure this will be a very rich report. Over to you, Surbi.
Thank you, Meera. That was a very enriching and very well moderated discussion. I would now request our CEO and JSOIA1, Shri Abbagani Ramu, to please give the closing remarks.
Good evening to everyone. Secretary Sanjay Bhattacharya ji, Chairman ICM, and Moderator Dr. Meeda Sethi, distinguished panelists, Ms. Shoma Sharma, Mr. Rajiv Gupta, Mr. Mehdi, Mr. Kishore Das, and all the participants from all over India. And it is very, very interesting and enlightening for me. And certainly I believe that it should be for everyone. It is very comprehensively discussed about the approach what we should have. But let me also add briefly on what is the thinking of the government of India as a whole. Secretary mentioned essential point of it, but the main issue of this migration cycle simple and migrant centric is to how to bridge the gap of information exists about the opportunities available abroad and taking that information to the person on the ground, that is migrant worker. So the information, communication and skilling, if I can simplify this channel, but these steps include a lot of players from international level, our embassies, and at the national level, Ministry of External Affairs, Skill Development, Education, Labor, and state level skill institutions, industry, private sectors, think tank, research. So this whole web of network is available, but somehow still the information gaps still exist. I think many important issues brought up today, that there are new areas of the sectors are coming up, new area of geographically, new destinations are coming up, and they have issues related to lack of linkages, lack of communication. So these all still exist despite all our efforts. So I think I've been feeling for some time that as government also pointed out, it needs really a comprehensive and integrated approach for this filling the gaps and really taking that information to the persons needed. India as such is a very complex and very big place. And when you take this to international situation, and connecting people from the villages, towns, districts to the destination is a huge task. I think all of us are doing good job, but I think it still needs some kind of when the task is big, like as a spider starts, it's on its own, but it's builds a whole web of a spider. So I think we need to see that we need to go beyond our areas of comfort and try to reach out every other player, so that everyone makes that effort. There is some kind of fulfilling happens in these gaps. So I think let us be all the spider, like see that no loose ends. So I think everyone feels like that. I think there will be certainly some improvement, but I can assure you that government has realized this fact and making efforts to fill this gap. And Secretary mentioned that we are reaching out to different states, different industries, bodies dealing with this issue of migration. But I think it is a good discussion. It will certainly throw a lot of thoughts for our further discussion and further thinking, thought-provoking ideas. I think with these few words, I wish once again all the participants and the moderator, panelists, thank you very much, and a very good evening to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for really highlighting the key points of the discussion. I think the key takeaway for us at ICM will be to engage more with all of you on more such discussions, because then only we can come up with more practical suggestions. So on that note, before we close, I would request all of you to kindly turn on your cameras, because we take a group picture at the end of all our discussions. So we would just wait for about 20 seconds for everyone to turn on the camera.